Thanks. See Dominic enjoying that. Yeah, thanks, Dominic. Thumbs up there. So anyway, this is something that's been in the works for a little while, and I'm thrilled that this is actually happening. As I said, it's completely unrehearsed. We don't know where this is going. We have no plans. I know that Sheri and Linda are both exceptionally good storytellers, so I'm sure it'll be
Oh,
interesting. Oh, come on! You can pat yourself on the back there a little. There we go. So, how do you want to start, you guys? What do you want to? I mean, I'm assuming everyone knows who Sheri Hickman and Linda Quiring are. I'm guessing.
old
Oh,
Salt
well,
Springer.
okay. So I mean, that's most of us on the call, though, Linda. You know.
Are
um,
old.
so, do you guys have a thought as to how you want to do this? I mean,
Yeah, yeah, we
I
do.
know roughly the framework.
We talked a bit yesterday amongst
Fantastic.
lots of other things, and I sort of have a plan that because I'm the one who lost these teachings, I would explain how I lost them,
We'll
and
start
then
there. Okay.
Sheri found them, and she'd explain how she found them.
Perfect.
So,
Perfect.
um,
So then I'm going to kick back into the background and try to monitor
okay,
the chat and mute people as they come on. And Linda, do you want to tell us a little bit about what was lost?
yeah, this is what was lost. You can see this.
Aha.
It's these green binder things. And it was lost for about 43 years. This is such a crazy story. So after Sid and I wrote the first book, Island of Knowledge, and it was kind of out there in the world, and by the time it got out there, there were a few people, more and more people listening to Sid, and he was starting to go here and there and speak to other just small groups. But and the Island of Knowledge was selling really well. Our first printing was 2,000 copies, which completely sold out very quickly. For that, this is 1974, remember, and so there's not, internet or any of those things. We're just our little group traveling around with Sydney Banks. And I didn't really know it at the time, but apparently in those days, whenever Sid spoke, of course, I would, have a stack of books there someplace and be selling books. And Bill and I traveled around really a lot and put them in all the local bookstores. Like there's a spiritual bookstore in downtown in Vancouver that was famous. It's still there, called Bantam Books. And we had it there. We had it in all the like spiritually oriented 2-3 of those type of bookstores in our area, not in our little island, which of course was at the time 2,000 people. So that was selling really well. And it was so incredible writing this book for all of us. And as soon as it was finished and out there, then Sid wanted to start another one, and which was okay with me. And I had an idea because at the time I was reading so many spiritual books just after, I had read them before meeting Sid, but after that, I think we were all reading these books and, Masters of the Far East, and swapping them around and, giving them to Sid and see what he thought. But several of the ones I had were people asking questions of their teachers or spiritual leaders or gurus, and I had 2-3 books that were just questions that people were asking. And many other of these books, there were parts of them where people would be asking questions. So I had this brilliant idea. Let's do that, Sid. And of course, he agreed to it. So we started out, and how we progressed was I would just ask a question, write it down, and Sid would take it, give it to Sid. He'd or give him 2 or 3, a few at a time, and he would, of course, he did everything in his handwriting, and he'd write the answer down, give it back to me. I would type them out and put it in the famous green binder, and we worked on that for quite some time. And then at some point it seemed like I started to run out of brilliant questions, and I think Sid and I we both got sort of a little bored with working this way, because with the other book, the other people in our small group, which was Pam and Jim Beck, Judy and Jim Wallace, and the Simpsons, who were Sid's brother-in-law Dave and his wife Carol, and of course Barb Banks. All of the first book, it had always, the way we'd written it, Sid and I would write something, we'd have our little gathering Friday nights, and Barb would usually read this. Someone said, well, why aren't there videos of all this? And it's like, excuse me, there was no such thing, hadn't been invented yet. You're going back a long time. But the first, so that's what happened. And as I said, I think we got sort of bored with it. And at some time, I felt mostly I'd run out of brilliant questions and Sid was bored. So Sid suggested we go back to the original format. So we did, which included, the whole group. And by that time, there's people like Sheri and Dawn have appeared and so on. And the second book was Beyond Beliefs. And right at the very end of that book, of course, things had changed so much with Sid and the group and so on. There were so many people around, and the psychologists had come, and there was so much competition for Sid's time, and he was traveling, and the whole thing had changed. And then in the end, of course, if you've read my third book, Sid and I parted company. And so that was that. Now, I kind of totally forgot about these, this idea that we'd had in this little, binder. The last question, I'd given it back to Sid and it kind of disappeared. And then for a couple of years, we were working on Beyond Beliefs. So they just got lost. But there was, and what we were doing, the first page, there's not a question. I think it was just something Sid and I were talking about it. And it's so short that, I don't know if you can see that, but it's some of those early brilliant teachings of Sid. He said, do you live on a level of consciousness where your highs come when people and things on a particular day suit you? The odds are against this happening, and as a result, people have few highs. The simple way is for you to suit the day. Then you will be high whenever you wish. I like that. But the kind of questions, and we wanted to just bring some of this out, and so Sheri chose the question. There's two questions here. So the first one, I'll read Sid's answer. And the question is, how would you describe nature? And it's now I wonder, why did I ask that question? But I've always been very, of course, I live in the country and in the middle of, fields and forests. And in my spare time, I've always done a lot of hiking in the woods, and probably spent half my life, outdoors. So that was my question. And Sid's answer was totally not what one would expect, which I'll read. One could say nature is a great open space where we put all of our thoughts. These thoughts are everything we hear, feel, and survey. This is what we call nature. It is the playground of life where children are born, grow old, and die. Yet they return in due course, reincarnation in brackets, to God's playground, the playground of thought, that which we call nature. That was Sid's answer. So you can see, not what one would expect. So as I say, after that, this just disappeared, and I forgot all about it for 43 years. And then a few years ago, you probably all know, suddenly I got a phone call from a guy named Jack Pransky. He's like, you're Linda Quiring. You wrote this book with Sydney Banks, in 1973, 4. Yes. It's like, we have to have this published. So, huh? What? So there you go. It gets published. And like he says, one day him and I are talking on the phone. We've never met in person to this day. And I say something like, yeah, the second book. And he says, what? It's like, yeah, well, there was a second book, you know. And he says, what? He wrote another book with Sydney-Based? And it's like, I guess I casually say, yeah, I think I still have the manuscript here somewhere. So it's like, I think I have it up there in my office. So I go up in my office, and sure enough, here's this green. Exactly. I think I bought a pack of them. Here it is. And so that's, I think there was just the last chapter wasn't quite finished. So we finished that Beyond Beliefs, and it got published, of course. And one day I was out in the grocery store here shopping, and lo and behold, who do I run into? Sheri Hickman. I hadn't seen Sheri for a while. And Sheri says, what you been doing now that you're retired? And I say, well, strangely enough, I'm working on a book. Would you like to illustrate it? And we both laugh like silly because, of course, 43 years before, Sheri had illustrated Island of Knowledge. And we had a good laugh and something. And then shortly after that, we decided, well, we should get together, more often than every few years. Sheri had been living and working off island. I get a call from Sheri, and Sheri has found something. So, Sheri, here you go.
You're up.
Your turn.
What did you find, Sheri?
Well, again, we have to go back to the beginning a little bit, and about 1974, one of the things why we were laughing actually in the grocery store is the illustrations I did for the first book were like a dancing girl and lotus blossoms. It was so funny that, that's what we thought of as something like that represented something kind of spiritual to us at the time. And it was, they're not great drawings, so a little bit embarrassed, but that's why we were laughing about it. Oh, right, like you want some dancing girls and lotus blossoms in your new book, and then that was when Linda mentioned to me, well, would you like to actually write your experience and how Sid changed your life and what you learned from Sid, and write a little piece for this second book, which is what I did, and it's in that last book. Not her second book, but this last book. And while we were meeting at times and going over what it was I was going to say and what did she want, and I'd write too much or too little or not quite what we were looking for. And I was saying, I had these amazing teachings, a little book that Sid had given me years ago. And when I read them, I can remember reading through and just crying, going through the whole thing and just crying and feeling. Sid used to tell me, Sheri, you don't have to cry. But every time I have one of these experiences where I feel one with nature or whatever it is, or he would even say something in one of his talks that would meet me, I start to cry. So I know he was trying to get me to stop doing that, but it's something automatic with me. When my husband had any experiences like that, he would just come out like shining like a sunbeam with his whole face shining, and people would gravitate towards him as he would get up out of his seat. He's a very quiet, shy sort of guy. Get up out of his seat and go to walk down the row or something. Everyone would come up to him because he'd have this shine. And I'd say to him, well, like, you don't cry. And he said, no, it's more like getting hit with a bolt of lightning, he said. So for me, it was a different experience. So I was talking to Linda about this little booklet and what had happened. But I said, I lost it because we moved to Nanaimo, everything got packed away, and I haven't seen the book now for like 20 years or whatever it was. And so she said, oh, I wonder what that was. We couldn't figure out what it was at the time. And what had happened in 1974 and 5, everybody was chipping in and doing a lot of work for Sid. He had moved into his mother-in-law's house with his wife and David and Susan. And it was a very small little cabin. So they were adding things, using an outbuilding for a bedroom for one of the kids and all this stuff. And he had to redo his whole septic field. So my brother-in-law is a very mesmerizing person. He just looks like a Viking prince, all this long blonde hair at the time. He doesn't have all that now. And he just had this charisma that people are attracted to. And so here's this guy driving a backhoe and putting in this septic field. And Sid also has that attraction to this guy. He just shines something out of him. And so Sid had a few conversations with him and thought, this is an amazing guy, a really high guy. And so when I was out at Sid's, Dawn and I were there visiting, having tea with them. And he said, I want to give you this booklet and give this to your brother-in-law to read. Because Andy had done the drain field and he moved on and he had no interest in this kind of stuff that we were listening to. But so I originally took the book to give to Andy, which I did, to my brother-in-law. And he read it and gave it back to me. He didn't say much. So I read it, and then I had this amazing experience. So I put it in with my other spiritual books and stuff, packed everything away, and went off to my new life being a social worker in Nanaimo. And so this was years later. I'm talking to Linda. So one day I decided I'm just going to really...
Excuse me, 43 years later.
So 43 years later, I run into Linda in the grocery store, and that led me into going through and unpacking paperwork and photographs and for a couple of weeks. And then one day I found the booklet, and I read just a couple of things in it at that time. And I was, and that's all I could read. You can only read a page or two if you're really focusing on it. And that's all you can take in at one time. So anyway, that's how it turned back up. And then I think, Linda, I gave it to you, and didn't you say when Bill read it, he cried?
Yes. And there are 29 pages in this. And there's a lot more. A lot of pages have 2 questions. So, and some of this is amazing. Of course, it's before there are no principles. Some of it is just mind-blowing. So it's 29 pages of this, and we've been this happened, I guess, about a year ago. We've been talking ever since. What should we do with it? This is amazing. Should we publish a book? At one point, we thought, well, let's just give them to Michael Fallon. He can put them online or something. We thought, that's not a great idea. So I think possibly. No offense. No, it's just no, that would have been great to circulate it in a way, but we thought, no, it needs a more just general and something, go out there. And then we sort of and our idea was that we call this book we may publish, Lost and Found, and what the teachings of, or the early teachings, Sydney Banks, something like that. I don't know, but Lost and Found, and I'll tell how they happened, how they were created in the first place, and how they got lost. Sheri will tell how they got found, and then we would actually publish these amazing. When I read these, it really, I could say, blows my mind, because I forget. After all these years, what those early first teachings that the few of us heard, how they were so different and what they were really like. And we just want to share them. So today we thought, well, we'll do a little teaser and get this out there and see what people think of some early teachings. And Sheri, you had a particular one, and this is on the same page as the nature question, and where Sid says this is nature is the playground of life. I just love that the playground of life. It's God's playground, and where people are born, grow old, and die, and then return. to God's playground, the playground of thought. So nature is the playground of thought. Just so not what I thought Sid would say to this question. And the next question is Sheri's going to talk about the next question, which was her favorite. Sheri?
Okay. Yeah, this whole piece, this section of it, just this one page, and every page is just as special, but spoke to me so much because of, I know I talked the other day about losing my daughter, losing my grandchild, and right now, why I chose this and said, Linda, let's do this piece, because there's so many people that we're losing from the planet right now with this coronavirus, and people are losing family members and much faster than usual. And it just meant so much to me, and it gave me so much comfort, this whole piece. When I read this one and I was reading through, and this is, years later, so, my daughter had already been killed. And I really did cry when I read this piece, because it gave me that, I already knew, when Sid spoke, when I would hear something, what I would feel, and you're sitting in a meeting with many, many people often, and it's very, very quiet, and just Sid is at the front with a microphone. This is a way before there was anything like principles, and like, I actually don't know very much about the principles and stuff. I haven't looked at that. I've heard about it, and I usually get the number of them wrong and stuff, so sorry, but so
5 principles.
It was just when he spoke then, it was so amazing. Like, it just came across as these very simple things. And inside of me, the way I would hear it, and I know people have these really big experiences, obviously, like Sid's really big experience, and other people have had amazing other kinds of experiences. But for me, it was like little bits of things that happened every time I listened. And I would just go into this place of feeling so amazing, like being in warm butter or something, where it was just this feeling. And I would I couldn't think with my mind what he's saying, because if you're in your mind and you're trying to figure out what that means and what he's saying, then you're in your mind and I'm not saying you're not getting anything out of it, but I'm just saying it's different when it really becomes one of the cells in your body. Because when that happens, something inside of you that's beyond your brain, beyond your heart, it's something else. It just goes, I know that. And when you recognize, that's like the recognition of the truth of it. And you carry it around in you, and you don't even know what that exactly meant until one day you see what we were calling in those days, a game that you're playing in life. So a little game that you always had, where you start an argument with your child about what he wears to school, or just some little thing where you get into this little argument for no reason, but you do it every morning, because that's what you do in the morning before your child goes to school, so they can go to school all bummed out, And so suddenly you see this, and I know when that happened with my son and I, he saw it first, and he'd been hanging around with me at Sid things. He was just a little boy, but when he came out of his room in his good white shirt, and I said, are you going to wear that to school? It's your new shirt, you can't. And he just looked at me with a smile, and I said, you're going to get it dirty. And he just looked at me with this big smile and said, yeah, probably. And he just had this glint in his eye. And at that moment, we both saw, he saw it first, I guess. And we both just saw this game that we did every morning to get both bummed out before he went to school. And we started to laugh so hard. It was like happiness fills your whole body. And it's so funny. You just see yourself as this little Charlie Brown character and what you've always been doing, And so that's the whole thing about hearing a little bit of truth and then having it change you. And I think that's what took me through the death of my daughter and all of these things that I've got through. It's just something knowing inside of you that it's okay, that the universe is working as it should. And so I just thought this section of these writings was so apropos right now for what's happening in the world. And so as Linda's question was when she asked at the beginning, of course, these are both her questions to Sid. The first one was, how would you describe nature? And that's when he said, he mentions this playground of life where children are born, grow old, and die. So Linda, second question that she comes back with, obviously, is, I have heard you say there really isn't any death. And now you say we grow old and die. And Sid answers, this death I speak of is merely the disrobing of the body. The true you, this inner self, never dies. This inner self returns once again to God's playground with a new body. I had no memory of ever hearing Sid say this. He had said many times there is no such thing as death, and we'd heard that many times, but I had never heard him explain it like this. And somehow when I found this booklet was it 3 years ago, Linda, somewhere around there, and I read this piece as I was reading through, I was like struck by lightning. And I knew the truth of it deep inside of me somewhere. I can't figure it out with my mind, but somewhere deep in me, I know. And we just really, really wanted to share this with everyone right now that's going through such a scary time for all of us and have lost people, and just to give some comfort.
Wow.
So there's this, I don't know how many pages, Linda, did you say there was?
29 or
29
29,
pages.
29. And a lot of them do have 2 questions per page, so, and answers. And you just can't sit down and read the whole thing at once. It's too much. You know, reading 1 a day or 2 a day is, so that's what we're working on right now, is trying to put this in it wouldn't be a very big book, I don't think, a little book that you could keep by your bedside and people can read one a night or something like that. And to me, these are Sid's really pure teachings of just simple truth. And you don't have to memorize anything or know about any principles. You know, I'm not saying anything about the principles because I don't know what they are, but I'm just saying this was the true thing. And I'm sure that they're in all of this because this is what he would have based the principles on, is the basic things that he's talking about here.
I'm just looking at a few of these other questions. Sid, I was telling someone I had this experience a while ago because I was speaking with someone. So many people have called me and message, email, and all of that are all over the world and studying Sid's teachings. And they were sort of talking about something that he taught. And I found myself sort of getting, kind of not upset, but it's like rising this like, no, that's not what he taught. And I'm thinking, and the thought comes, no, that's not what Sid taught. And as soon as I, had that sort of negative feeling, I thought, okay, what's this? And I thought, oh, that's not what Sid's taught. And I thought, oh, it's not what Sid taught me, but it's what he taught them. Because over, 40 years of teaching, his teachings evolved. And I thought, because, I was there at a whole different era, a whole different time. So what he was teaching me possibly was different. So I made a list of the things that Sid taught. And Sheri, you probably agree with most of these. One thing, someone asked me once, and this person was, kind of a difficult person. And they were demanding to know, like, well, how were the teachings different, And I said, well, for one thing, they were a lot more personal. This small group of people and so on. It's like, well, what do you mean personal? And I thought, oh no, well, I know what Sid would have told this person right off the bat after speaking with him for 15 minutes, but of course I didn't want to say anything. But self-importance was something that he talked about. Sheri, would you concur with that? Self-importance, he talked about that a lot. So here's a question: why is self-importance so detrimental in our growth towards self-realization? And he answers that. There's just what is the fear we feel, and how do we, opening up to truth, how do we, get rid of that? Here's another: is there any prayer or chant I can say to myself that will help me on my journey to knowledge? And his here he writes about faith. If faith is lacking, words of wisdom are only words. They mean only what the listener wants to hear. And he goes on, faith opens the secret door, which leads to the kingdom of heaven here on earth. It makes the blind see, the deaf hear. It turns negative into positive, makes the sun shine into your life. Faith can do anything. And it's just, it's so amazing what's in here. Like that one, you can sit there and meditate on faith for a while.
And in those early days, he would speak. He wasn't afraid to speak about those the Christ spirit and use the word God and all of those things. And it was only later, because he wanted it to be as part of psychology, and he couldn't speak religion, what sounded like religion, in the universities. So he had to make it more about the psychological terms. But in all these early teachings, he'll often talk about things being the Christ consciousness and things
God.
like that. Yeah, use God, yeah.
Except, part when he talked about his experience, the actual experience, and part of it was his understanding, like what is God, and it's the energy of all things.
Of all things, yeah.
The energy of all things, and he used that phrase over and over and over. And then he in those early days, he talked to us a lot about energy and this energy, and we kind of use it. We can use it in a positive way, a negative way, but we're just energy. Everything is just this energy, and you choose, well, it's hard to explain. You have to listen to him explain it. But and I know it's very controversial, I know when I say this, but he did say to me shortly before his passing that he regretted that he had changed the teaching from a very spiritual teaching more into a psychological and intellectual slant on it. And I know that he believed, and he did this with the deepest of just love for people, and really seeing, like with himself and his family, what happened when he had his experience. And then people like myself come along, and I'm just stumbling out of the mental hospital. I've had like I was having had the maximum amount of shock treatments they can give somebody, because I was so depressed. Now I really know that it was what they call the dark night of the soul. I was just really, really searching for something. And I meet Sid, so that's the end of that. Pretty soon, I'm writing a book, and I got all these dear friends, and working with Sydney Banks. But he just, and he saw, like, people can just change overnight, and that's basically what happened to me and a lot of other people. And he just wanted to share that with so many. He just wanted to share it. And because he could just see, this is so incredible. And I know, I think I've told this before, that he said to me once when I kept trying to like Sheri, you mentioned games. This is another thing in my list. He talked a lot about games. People play games in relationships. It's like, I don't know, somebody is the boss of a company and they keep losing all their employees. Why? Well, they're playing games, they do trips, they do power trips. He talked a lot about games. And like when I try to complain, or not so much complain, but get some attention, like, oh, poor me, look what happened to me. I had to go through all of this. And of course I started out, I was feeling badly depressed. I went to the doctor. He gives me some pills or something that doesn't work. He sends me to a psychologist and she tells me to get a divorce. So I do that. That wasn't so great. And then they sent me to a more famous, well-known psychologist. And finally I end up with a psychiatrist who is one of the top people. I mean, there's books written about this guy. And people like Cary Grant, the movie star, was coming up to Vancouver to work with this famous psychiatrist. And that's the fellow who put me in the hospital. And so, I'm sort of devastated by this, and I'm treated sort of strangely by, some of my family and people I knew who were kind of like, oh, well, she's, kind of lost it, and found that scary to be even around someone who's, like, oh, I just stumbled out of the mental hospital. And so I tried to, I felt bad for myself, and I kept trying to, talk to him about it. And so my trip was like, oh, victim, oh, poor me, look what happened to me. I want some attention for this. I want some sympathy. That was my game then. And it's just like, no way. So he tells me, one of these times I'm trying to get a little, sympathy from Sydney Banks. And he says, you were lucky. I was like, huh? And I was like, yeah, like, don't play the victim. You were lucky. If that hadn't happened to you, if you hadn't gone through that experience, you would not be ready, to come here and listen to what I'm saying. And so he was very personal. Sheri, you probably agree with this. And a lot of people did just not like this, and would disappear. He goes to someone like, and he'd say like somebody's game was, they're a know-it-all, they know everything and how high and, highly evolved they are. And all of a sudden one day he'd say a few short sentences and so on. I think in my book, I talked about another woman who was around, and it's like, Sid, tell me, I'm so into this, the spiritual path, I love what you're saying. What should I do next? And she's, I'm her friend. She's talking to me. Oh, I really want to, spiritually evolve. And I love Sid. This is so incredible. I found this. And so she says to Sid, no one else is around. Sid, what's next on my path? And he said, you go home now. You clean your house, take care of your kids. When your husband comes home from work, he's working all day. You have a hot meal for him. Quit this flitting around, chatting with people, sitting in the cafe talking about higher truth, and, go home and clean the house. I mean, it's not what like we're expecting from the enlightened man. And so I guess as, things change, there are more and more people that got, impossible to do, but that's kind of what it was like. So I would say way more people who came along left, because that was just, he's pretty honest and direct. And the other thing is, people can be honest and direct, but they're not seeing that. Like, I might tell my husband a few things being honest and direct, but maybe I'm not objective and all of that. But Sid could just see so clearly, unemotionally and objectively, oh, well, you're doing this, stop it. You want to, have your life.
The answers would often be the unexpected, just like the answer to this question, what is nature, is where how do you describe nature, and you think he's going to talk about trees and forests and things, because he did sometimes talk about I can take you into the forest. You can get energy from so many things around you. Energy's everywhere you can get at, like from these places, meaning a higher energy. And so he would talk about, going into the forest and showing you that there was energy there. But I mean, I've heard him say to people, you remember when the yogic or something guy came, he was all in white robes and stuff, and he had some big studio in Vancouver where people did yoga exercises and meditated and stuff. And he came, and he obviously came kind of to argue with Sid. He'd come over from Vancouver. We were at Beaver Point Hall, and this Sid was giving a talk, and our group was getting too big really at that point, and it was a big group then. And this guy sort of sat on the side, and he looked beautiful, like he had this long hair, glowing face, and white robes, and he looked like Jesus reincarnated kind of thing. And
his name Water or something like that?
Oh, maybe, yeah, probably. And he's sitting at the side, and Sid is talking, and you get that feeling that you get where you're in almost a meditative state when Sid was talking, where you didn't want nothing should make a loud noise or anything to crash you out of that. And so this guy starts arguing with them, and we're like shocked because nobody even talks to him. When Sid spoke, you didn't really sit there and ask him questions. After we did a bit when we were in the living room, and there was only 6 of us and so on. But when we were in the big halls and he was speaking, everybody just listened until he was finished. And so we weren't even used to people butting in, and this guy starts talking about, well, you're not saying that a person can't reach their inner spiritual by sitting in the yoga position and having this mantra and all this, right? Because obviously it's working for millions of people and all that. And Sid just sat quiet for just a minute, and he did not get into an argument with the guy. He just sat really quiet, and he said, you're never going to find it sitting and staring at your belly button. And it was just like the guy was completely shocked, and just the way he said it, he just said this kind of in a harsh way, like that's absolute bullshit. You're not going to get it from staring at your belly button. And so, of course, a lot of people kind of laughed too, and the guy was quite embarrassed. And I think they had a big discussion later after, just the 2 of them as well. But he didn't mince words. Remember when that, well, I won't say her name, but she was talking like about the flies in her window and all that, and she was saying, well,
I remember that.
Yeah, and she was a very sweet person, and I love her, but she did get off on a little tangent there, and she was kind of saying, I was looking at my lace curtain against the window, and this fly was buzzing against the window, and I was feeling one with all of nature and realizing the fly and its buzz and its purpose in life. And Sid is sitting there like looking at her, and he said, that's just bullshit. That a fly is just swat. Yeah. And everybody was like, yeah. So he didn't fool around. He really let you know what he thought when you were going off on some fake kind of trying to be, oh, I'm really high, look at me, like I know all these things or something. He would just shoot you right down in a nice way. It was usually a way where you could really learn something, because you were crushed for a minute and then you learned something from that.
Well, you know what was so beautiful, I think, what you're saying, and I know, different things he said to me, was he would say these things like for instance, say your friend or your partner says this to you, it's like you tell them to, what, but and you don't have to look at it, because you just think, oh, they're being nasty or something like this. But with Sid, it was so different, so amazing, because he would, you're talking to him or whatever, and he'd say these things sometimes in front of the group, and we were also best friends, intimate, all of that. So but usually not, usually when you were just the 2 of you talking. and which could be anywhere, you know, in his front lawn or in your garden or going for a walk in the woods or in the local restaurant or something. And he'd say this. But you know what was so powerful about it is, unlike, you know, other people doing this, I think, is there was no emotional anything behind it. It's not like when your, you know, your mom gets mad at you or something and says, you know, you're, you know, messy and untidy, or, you know, or your husband nags you because he comes home from work and he's got to eat crap dinner. But with Sid, it was so, there's no emotion involved. There's no trips. There's no something. He just is like, you're talking about something or doing your trip, and it's like, you know, here's what you're doing. You know, points it out to you. Oh, like so clearly, and in not a big, long psychological kind of intellectual thing about what you're doing. Is like he points it out in a sentence or something so clearly, with no, on his part, no emotional involvement. And then, you know, the next minute he moves on. And you can feel, oh, it's not personal. There's no animosity, no criticism implied. He's just seeing, you know, he used that word a lot, seeing, hearing. He's like, but really seeing what you're doing. He just points it out to you and moves on. So you can listen or not listen. But it's like the thing about the housework. I know with this particular woman that, you know, like she got it. You know, people might have been telling her she's, you know, messy and, you know, won't clean her house for decades. But it's like, hey, she got it. And the same with, you know, myself. And I'm sure with you, Sheri, too, it was just his way of teaching. And it was always so simple, you know, that I think you got it. And even those people that got upset, left the room, never came back, which happened a lot.
Yeah,
I think they got it too.
Yeah.
It's just they didn't want to look at it. And of course, we didn't want to look at it. You know, who wants to look at their, you know, baggage? Nobody.
at the games they're playing. I loved
Yeah.
it when he would say, you can hear truth anywhere. You don't have to just listen to me, him. You can hear truth anywhere in your life, and don't be afraid to be open to it, because it might be the beggar on the street. They might not know what they say. They might not realize what they say, but you can hear truth in that. I mean, after all, Sid had his total experience after somebody told him thinking about his insecurities was just bullshit. And so that triggered him into something. The person had no idea what they said or what they'd done or anything else. That was one of his stories anyway, of how his you know, insights began. But it was a very good realization for me when he said that about you can hear truth anywhere. Because as a social worker, when I was working in child protection and family support, I could realize that these people were just as spiritual as me somewhere inside of them. They were just stuck where they were. And you can't just think of yourself as the counselor, the therapist, or the psychiatrist as being the superior being in that relationship with these other people. They might be in trouble in their life right now. I saw people in desperate situations that have lost their children into foster care and all of that happening. But they were spiritual beings also. And sometimes they would say things that would completely blow me away, that they didn't even know what they were saying, but I heard it. And so being open to that in anywhere, in any situation. And I remember, Linda, that we were talking about that one day, and a fellow came in that was homeless and couldn't pay for his meal. And you were so inspired, I think, by what I said, that you paid for his meal and you took him home with you. And
to do some work. Oh,
yeah. Linda gave him the opportunity to work around the farm and live in their little cabin and stuff. And the guy kind of blew the whole thing, and she had a hard time getting rid of him. But it was funny because I guess we overdid it. We overdid it that day, maybe. But Yeah, it was the day that we were talking about that and how you can hear truth anywhere and we should be open to everyone. And then we ended up with this guy that didn't really appreciate any of what we were trying to do, but that's life.
Well, he
But
kept walking around having coffee in our favorite little, down the road. It used to be, I don't know what, it used to be a gas station 50 years ago. It's a little kind of local coffee shop. Every once in a while, a tourist finds it and goes crazy because it's the coolest place on earth and it's 10 feet from the ocean. And this guy just kept walking around and and every time he came past Sheri and I, he'd stop and he'd just look at us
was
like,
picking something up. We were having a very spiritual talk at the time. Maybe he was picking up the energy, but he wasn't quite ready to move on from his problems. But yeah.
So this is brilliant. We've got 7 minutes or so left. Do you want to take some questions?
questions.
Yeah.
My time is pretty good, but for everyone, I mean, typically an hour, right? So
Yeah.
open it up, questions or comments or anything like that. As you've been both talking, I've been rifling through my sheets to find questions and answers that are in line with what you're saying, and this is just everywhere. Such good stuff. But anyway, questions, comments, thoughts from anyone? You can just unmute yourself if you have something to contribute or something to ask about.
Just quickly, maybe I'll I was reading on this, I think this Facebook group a few days ago about the past, and I think it's like, wanting to coach people and help people and so on. Like to do that, you really have to, kind of be there for them, and we all want, the listening ear, maybe not the sympathy and all that, but to share what's going on and so on. But it's really true that Sid, he just wouldn't go there. Like for him, no matter what happened, good, bad, whatever. Oh, well, last year I won this award for being, something. It's like, forget it, move on. What did you do today? And he was so, I think, in the present. But he was, and Sheri, maybe hear your thoughts on this too. He really would not do that. He wouldn't go back into anybody's sad story, great story, no matter what it was. It's like, that's the past. It's gone. It's dead. And also, riffing off into the future. Well, I might do this. It's like, no, doesn't count. What are you doing today, huh? That was, he was very, very strict about that, people wanting to talk about the past. And in our small group and so on. So we were all free to just chat about what was happening or ask questions or, tell our experience. And it was like, no, you don't go into the past. It's like rule number one, the past, gone, dead, forget it. It might affect you. And he said that's how psychology was missing it by just spending so much focus. Like in my case, they kept saying, trying to get me to remember something horrible and that had happened. And they said, well, it must have been something so horrible happened to me to be depressed. And it was so horrible that I was repressing it. So I couldn't talk about it, with the psychologist. That's their theory, right? I mean, I guess like it couldn't occur to them. Maybe, no, that didn't happen. No, it wasn't that. It was just, something else. But he just would not do that. He would not go there, discuss details of your problems here.
Linda, may I share one from the pages?
Sure.
Because you're talking about the past. So the question is, I really don't see what is wrong with hanging on to the past. Answer: to hang on to the past is preventing you from being now. We all hang on to the past because we are what the past has created. When we hang on to the past, it stops us from being now and makes us see what isn't instead of what is. Seeing this what is seeing the truth. It is breaking the control which the past has on your life, put there through society via you. What you see in the total sum of all your conditioning had to come via you. You see what you are. Believe me, let the past go. It is a burden around your neck. As you begin to drop the past, you will become stronger with more positive power. This power will help you drop more and more of the past, picking up yet more power, and the game keeps going on until you drop the whole damn thing.
Where is that? Where is that?
It's for Sheri, it's page 12. Linda, for you, it's the what is section number 2.
What
Just
is
the 2 different ways that we tried to put them together, Linda. So on the original one, it was page 12.
And then the way that I got them from you, it would be what is page number 2.
Yeah, that's another thing he talked, a phrase he used a lot. What is? Do you remember that, Sheri? I'm just remembering that now. What is?
So
One of my favorite things is how he would say, it's so simple. You can hear the truth just like that. And he'd do that. And
just
right in the microphone. And you just go, you know, it was great.
Was someone asking about him walking on his hands?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
That wasn't me.
Yeah.
all right, let's
Sort of a mind blower.
we're close on time here. I'm going to throw it again for anyone. Questions, comments from anyone as we slowly start to wrap up?
Can I ask a question? Michael?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Hi, Linda and Sheri. It's Tim. I'm just interested in what sense you've got of unconditional love, just reading through those 29 pages from Sid.
Well, I would say Sid, he practiced that unconditionally, unconditional love. It didn't matter like what your state in the world was. I mean, you could wander in and you're a top psychology who's running the department at the University of blah, 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 in, Minnesota or someplace, or you're the homeless hippie guy that wandered in off the street. He was, the same with everyone. And he did have just that unconditional, acceptance. And well, in a way, like I say, he was kind of strict with us, and it's okay, here's what you're doing. But yet it was done with you knew it was done with unconditional love. Because of the spirit that he conveyed this, and you knew why he was doing it, not because he wanted to pick on you or make you feel bad, but he just sort of exuded that. If you've ever read about unconditional love, what is that? Well, he really did express that. Sheri?
Well, one of the things with him too, he had no attachment to whether you heard. He offered it out of love. Obviously, he wanted everyone to have the experience that he had to get to the place that he was at. It wasn't like he wanted to be the guy on the throne with all this knowledge talking down to you. It was like, I'm telling you these truths because they're in you, and you can be here too. You can see what I have seen, because and that's why he'd always bring in, I'm just this little guy who was working in this mill in Nanaimo, having marriage problems, having all these difficulties. So then he has this experience. He stops everything. I think he worked for a little while at the mill. He had to kind of straighten out his affairs. But he comes to Salt Spring, lives with his mother-in-law, this little cabin. I mean, they had to, make it habitable for all of them. And he does all of that. He gives up his whole life where he could make a lot of money. He never tried to make money out of any of this. And
we kept trying to pay him for this because we'd been to different groups, and like, you pay so much for this.
Yeah.
He would just not accept a penny from us.
And that is unconditional love. You're not trying to make money from it. You're not trying to become a king or a god from it. You are just saying, I had this experience and now I have this knowledge. And like he always said to all of us, if your cup is full, you can't put anything more into it. You've got to share. You've got to empty your cup so more can come in. If you just take a little information and get a little ways, and you hold on to that, and you don't share it or do anything in your life to share it, then you
lose it.
You can't get more. Well, you can't get more. Maybe you can keep what's in your cup, but you're not going to go any farther. So that's all about love. He didn't talk about it so much as in, we were all these hippies that were all about love and everything. And we sang a lot of songs. We used to sing all these songs and dance, and it was crazy, really. But like, let the circle be unbroken by and by, oh Lord, that was one of the ones. And I heard this whole bunch. And it was all about love. We all felt a great deal of love for each other and for humankind, and throughout the whole thing. So I don't think he talked about it so much, like specifically as something.
Okay, thank you. I love you both for this. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
And, and just
Thank you.
Rudy has a question. So Rudy, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi guys. It's not actually so much a question. It was just feeling very, very grateful to you, Michael, for having a space where Sheri and Linda can share their wisdom. And
my phone is ringing.
Okay.
Linda, you're so funny.
Let's stop. There we go.
Hello.
Well, hold on. Okay, I've muted Linda. Carry on, Rudy. That's brilliant.
Go ahead, I'm here.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say I'm really, really grateful for you guys, and thank you so much, because it hadn't made any sense in my head to split one power into three. Like, I don't share this understanding as three separate things, it's just but as one power. And I think there's been a story created about Sid, and I think what you guys are doing, you're sharing your version, which really adds to and deepens the conversation in a very holistic way. And yeah, and I think for me, it's given me, as a facilitator, so to speak, it's given me so much more confidence to walk from what I feel within myself, the essence within myself, which is fundamentally what, in the direction that you guys are talking about. And it's so simple, and it's so loving, and it's so all-encompassing, and it's so beautiful, and it's so not what the concepts make up about it. So I just want to say thank you so much for Michael and Sheri and Linda and creating this space. Very, very grateful.
Thank you all for being here with us.
It's all them. It's all them, man. It's the two of them. I'm just a guy.
It's all selfish. We're just trying to empty our cup a little bit so more can come in.
On that might be the perfect note to end on.
Thank you, Michael.
No.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks to all of you, and of course Sheri and Linda for for bringing this, having the courage to bring this to light. Is the truth, and hopefully as time rolls on, we'll get a broader. We'll see what happens in the future. Who knows?
We'll publish a book.
This has been great.
I'll say one thing really quickly. It's amazing that this popped up just like now the world is ready for it. And I don't think 5, 10, 15 years ago, it wasn't.
Well, we look forward to having it become a little bit more public and available, hopefully. Fingers crossed for that. We'll see what happens, right?
Yes.
All right, I'm gonna wrap us up then, folks. Thank you so much. If you want to unmute yourself and we can do the collective, no one really hears each other, say goodbye and thank you and all that stuff, we could do that. So can I unmute everyone from here? Probably. Eh?
Yes.
Unmute all. All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Linda and Sheri, of course, and for all of you who came by. It's without you, there's nothing happening. So thank you so much. I'm gonna shut her down now, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Sheri, Linda.
All right. Bye-bye.